Jeremy, thanks so much for doing this, for joining us here at Bernama. You're here in Malaysia to talk about media literacy. You're here to talk about disinformation, freedom of expression. How's that conversation been going, Jeremy?
It's been going really great. Look, it's my first visit back to KL, to Malaysia,
In how long?
since before COVID. I used to be a regular visitor, but life takes over, work takes over, so it's really special to be back. And one of the things I've been struck about is how much we have as two countries in common when it comes to the information systems we're working in, the information ecosystems that we're trying to secure, particularly for our young children, and for the sake of minimising misinformation and disinformation in society, which is a problem we're seeing right around the world.
Now, we hear media literacy all the time. For what you do and what I do, it's about the same. But what does it look like on the ground in your neck of the woods? In Australia, you've run school programs and fact-checking projects. You teach people to stop and question, do stuff like that, and think about what they see online. From your side, there are many approaches. Which approach do you think works best?
So when I was a child, I give this example that when I was a child studying in KK, and I was given an assignment about school, and I needed to find out information. There was no internet, there were no mobile phones, certainly didn't have a computer at home. You would go to the library and you would get a book, and the book would be a source of information. The one thing that you could absolutely trust was true. And since then, in the course of the last few decades, we now have information available at a scale that we've never seen anywhere before in the world. And with that comes information that is incorrect, that's produced in bad faith. And so what I think of media literacy being is about stop trusting that you're just going to the internet and you're going to find this one reliable source of information. It becomes much more incumbent on media consumers now to be able to discern what the source of the information is, how that information was produced, what might be the hidden agendas of everyone. And I'm not saying that people should be suspicious of everything all the time. That's not a healthy way to live. But just to always keep an open mind about being broad in our consumption and to try to question the quality of the information we're working with and not to rely on single sources of information.
Attention spans are becoming shorter as we speak. So, from long forms, we've moved to social media. Things have changed now. We're with the dawn of AI. We want information just like that, and we just skim through it. We stop reading. So, when you talk to people about media literacy, do you also talk to people about that reading, the P's and Q's of reading, or absorbing information whilst reading a long form article?
Reading is such a fundamental, I think, human right. It's an expectation that we place on our children. When we send kids off to school, we don't say to them, watch this 57-second reel and your school day is done. We expect children to read and to understand, and I think that responsibility should carry on through adulthood. So I think, yes, reading is an integral skill. I think the forms in which people consume information has been changing. It's less so the case now that people will wait until 7, 8, 9 p.m. to sit down and watch a single TV news bulletin, but they will consume news throughout the day. I'm very much, I wake up in the morning, pick my phone up, and it's one of the first things I do, just get a quick snapshot of what's taking place around the world. And then I'll go away and I'll consume a podcast, and then I might read the paper briefly, and then I might watch a TV show. So my news consumption is very deliberately very diverse. It's about reading, it's about watching, but also understanding that you can only get so much detail from a short piece of video or a short podcast. And so it's important, when I approach my job and I don't understand a particular story, whether it's got to do with climate change or war in another country or energy and climate policy, what I do is I read and I try to understand a story and educate myself. And I think we all just need to be really honest with ourselves about how much we're investing in what we understand about the world.
It's interesting you saying what you're saying, simply because some time ago I got a chance to attend a hate speech sort of panel, and I sat there with guys from Awani and a couple of other media houses in Malaysia, and we were talking about it. And I said, how do you train people? A lot of the work when people get into the media sphere to work happens before they get into media or before they learn about media, because you come into the working world with the biases you've grown up with, the religions you subscribe to, so on and so forth. So how much harder is it now to train people, and I'm digressing, how much harder is it now to train people in the media world to be on the ball, to have a finger on the pulse at all the time with regards to picking facts over fakes?
One of the fundamental skills and expectations, I think, of a good journalist should be that you are able to consider what if you're wrong. And that's not to say you live in a constant state of doubt, but to be able to put yourself in someone's shoes. These are lessons we learn in faith classes, across lots of different religions. We learn to put ourselves in other people's shoes. We learn to understand what a different point of view might be. And I think we apply that to our information ecosystems. It's the same thing. It's about understanding a story, but also being bold enough and mature enough to question whether I might be wrong and what am I not seeing in this room. And I think that's one of the ways we can counter bias and misinformation and keep an open mind about debate, and not being afraid of having our points of view either challenged or confirmed through a healthy and open debate.
Now, a lot of us, blur freedom of expression with freedom of the press, especially here. I'm not generalizing, but here in Malaysia, I see that a lot. For example, someone's personal post on social media is not the same as a newsroom investigation. Now, how do you draw the line, and why is that important? Knowing where to draw the line.
The freedom of expression is not is fundamentally tied to the responsibility to do no harm. So you can't just go out there and say anything you like, because that's freedom of expression. You have a responsibility to your society, you have a responsibility to your family and to your colleagues. And so freedom of expression, I think, comes with certain responsibilities, a social responsibility. I think it's difficult where media companies are expected to police things like comment sections, and we've had certainly cases in Australia where publishers have been held to account and held responsible for comments that are made by members of the public on their own platforms. So I think it's a distinction that's important to make, because we need to recognise that there is a fundamental responsibility when it comes to saying anything you like. And that's not to say we favour censorship. Certainly in Australia we try to foster really open debate as a measure of a mature society that can handle a bit of confrontation as a way of testing ideas that are good and bad, and holding government to account, holding individuals to account, holding corporations to account, and kind of jointly through that process figuring out what it is we want out of the world that we want to collectively share.
When you report on sensitive issues, politics, race, identity, we've got a big problem with that here. How do you keep it responsible and not turn it into division? And that's one thing we're trying to work on with regards to the younger generation of media people coming into the workforce here in Malaysia. So when it comes to responsibility, how do you keep it responsible and not turn it into division? What must all of us know at this point with everything being so saturated?
Let's look at what a successful multicultural country Australia is. Let's look at what a successful multicultural country Malaysia is. You look at other examples around the world, the richness that we have gained from the diversity of people that live in this country, in Australia and in Malaysia, the history that we all bring. I mean, we've all come here in some ways by very deliberate exercises of enterprise, people being really bold, moving to another country and trying to form new relationships and build bridges with each other. These bridges that we've built in our society, certainly here in Malaysia, is what holds us together. So we can't take those bridges for granted. We have to, understand that we need to maintain those bridges. And so the media has a role in expressing what it is that holds us together. For all our differences and all the diversity that we bring to society, the very same things that enrich us are the things that potentially bring fracture. So it's up to the media to always remind us where the tensions are and to report on those freely and fairly, but also to remind us what brings us together. And I'm not just talking about domestically in Malaysia, but also regionally for Malaysia, for countries like Australia, what relationships we have with other countries in the region. I think we often, in the media and in the public, think of country-to-country relations through a political lens. We think of the politics of your government versus the politics of my government. And the truth is, the people-to-people relationship between Australia and Malaysia is very strong. There is a huge diaspora of Malaysians who live in Australia, my family being among them. There are lots of Malaysian students who study in Australia. Some stay, some return. There are many Malaysians who come to, many Australians who come to Malaysia and enjoy the cultural exchange. I think the people-to-people relationships are really fundamental to securing a good neighbourhood, a safe neighbourhood, and pursuing some of our shared solutions to our shared challenges together.
Right. And here's a fun fact I use like a verbal tick all the time, that the coffee culture in Kuala Lumpur is the coffee culture of Melbourne or Australia.
It is absolutely comparable. There are so many things about our cultures that are so similar. And I love having a foot in both camps. You know, I grew up in Malaysia until the age of 13. So I have very strong memories of being a Malaysian child and then living in Australia and seeing the similarities and differences. And I know my family too, both here and in Australia, enjoys that exchange. Coffee culture among them. I've been on the lookout for cendol and teh tarik the whole time I've been here because you can't get it as good in Australia, but that's part of the joy of being bicultural.
You said, you talked about the media and the work of the media to help make people understand. Now, when you talk about the media, and I'm going to read this out, a little fact we got, or a little stat. Trust in the media is down globally. Only about 40% of people say they trust news most of the time. What do you think of broadcasters, or what they need to do to rebuild that trust in a real way? When I go home, I have family members saying that you guys, are bad news. When I turn on the TV, it's bad news every day. But it is the news. So, how do you find equilibrium or balance?
You're absolutely right. News avoidance is a really big issue for newsmakers right around the world. People are turning off because the news is quite often depressing. The reason I work in news is because I believe that there are certain things people need to know about how power is exercised in our community. Powerful people who are not held to account are dangerous for all of us. And so I believe in the need to keep asking questions and to fostering open debate, because suppressing open debate doesn't make dissent go away. It just pushes it underground and makes it invisible, and it pushes it to far corners of the internet. And ultimately that corrodes our sense of society and our faith in institutions like the law, in our police, in our armies.
So hang on, you talk about debate, and I like what you're saying here, but in Australia, is it a culture for politicians to be put on national media to debate people from the opposition? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. That regularly happens all the time, and certainly we in the ABC, we try to facilitate those discussions, and to do so in a respectful manner. No personal attacks, don't attack each other's family. These are some of the fundamental basic tenets of how you conduct a debate. And you can walk away with disagreement, but still have love for your country.
Right.
I think those two things are not mutually exclusive. And to ask someone a question, to test their idea, is not an act of undermining them, is how we think about it.
Right. So when it comes to Malaysia, we're still inching our way forward with regards to having good debates here. Now, someone floated the idea of getting people to just give their opinion. So you're from one camp, you're from another. Instead of debating, why don't you give an opinion as to where the country is or where the country needs to go? Would that be a better way to work that, to get people to come together and talk? Now, I know I'm digressing from what you're talking about, but yeah.
I think there are different ways to hold a debate. So I think it can be a person-to-person conversation. I think it can be two people speaking separately to the audience, and communicating ideas that way. What I think is fundamental for debate, though, is to approach it in good faith. If it's just two people just yelling at the camera or yelling at each other, it's not particularly informative viewing, and it doesn't serve a public interest to just broadcast an argument. But where it's a test of ideas and where people are willing to also, in a debate setting, find common ground, I think that is an expression of good faith. And so good faith involves also looking for things that we have in common, and also coming into a debate being well informed. I think you forfeit a right a little bit to enter a debate if you stubbornly enter into it without being properly informed.
Right. So what we want is for a country's media to be robust. And just before getting into the studio, I was doing a bit of reading about ASEAN, and I looked at Timor-Leste, and if you look at their rankings with regards to press freedom, they're 39th, and that's quite high up there. And having said that, governments often say they regulate to protect society, but they can turn into control. I mean, for some people, it looks like it's turning into control. How do you think governments can strengthen media without weakening independence? Like Malaysia now, I'm sure you've heard we have a media council. What would you think the role of the media council is at this point?
I think the relationship, to me, in my mind, and this is the case in Australia, and I'm not here in Malaysia to tell Malaysians how to conduct their media. I'm not here to instruct on anything. And Malaysia has a very distinct political, economic, cultural setting. But what I can tell you about the way it's done in Australia is that the pact that the government makes is not with the media, it's with the public. The government pledges to the public that it will support open and free debate and dissemination of information, and through that fund, with government money, the ABC to conduct that function. So it's not a transaction between the government and the ABC in our circumstance, or the government and the media. It's a transaction with, and a pledge with, the public, that if the government promises the public that this organisation will be held to a series of standards in order to serve the public. So the ABC's outlook is not so much to respond to government, but to serve the public. And I think that's a really important distinction
to make. So saying if you're with the ABC, you're going to interview a minister, say, just take, for the sake of an argument, interview Penny Wong, is there any way that their office can tell you, look, Jeremy, we can't touch these areas? Are there caveats there?
They can.
Yeah.
And I don't have to follow any of them, because I am there to serve the questions and serve the public by asking a certain number of questions. Now, if I am banned from asking a certain list of questions, or to say, only ask nice questions, I'm not quite sure doing a favourable interview with a minister. In this case, you talk about Penny Wong, who is Australia's foreign minister. She's also Malaysian born. I don't think that necessarily serves the interests of the public. So when I go into an interview, the deal is always, I can ask any question I want. And if there are restrictions, let's just not do the interview, because that damages my credibility and it doesn't serve the public's interest very well. And that's my number one job as a broadcaster, as a journalist, is to be independent and not have instructions given to me by the person I'm interviewing, because that damages my credibility and it doesn't serve the public.
Should governments be teaching media literacy, or should it be our work, newsrooms and that of us who sit in front of cameras?
I think, when you consider how much distrust there is, I don't think it's up to governments to teach media literacy, because governments are invested in keeping themselves in power. That's just how governments are. I think the responsibility should be flattened much more into the school system. The school system is something as a society we can all get behind. I would love to see media literacy being part of school curriculums at young ages, so that kids can understand that all information out there in the world, on the internet or whatever, is not necessarily put out there in good faith. Certainly not like when I was a kid. You go to an encyclopedia and you can absolutely guarantee that the information was solid. I would like to see media literacy taught in schools, and I would like to see those lessons carry on through life. And it's not about teaching kids to undermine everything in front of them and to misunderstand and be suspicious of everything, but to definitely question sources of information and to reach a kind of triangulation of information, that they might pull some information from here, a little bit of information from there, ask this person what they think, ask that person what they think, and then triangulate what they believe to be the truth, but at least seek out diverse sources. I think the responsibility lies with government to fund schools to do that job properly. I think it lies with the media to explain what our role is. It's my fundamental view with journalism that it is not my job as a journalist to persuade anyone of anything. I'm not there to make a case, a persuasive argument about anything. My job is to serve the public by presenting the best information I can to them. And whatever people decide from that information, whether they support a war or not, or whether they believe in climate change or not, or whether they believe wind power is more favourable to solar power, is completely up to them. It's not my job to mount a persuasive argument, but media literacy, to understand how to distill information, I think comes down to something that could be very useful in schools and right the way through adulthood.
So if a teacher in a kampong, sitting in a kampong,
Yep.
watching this interview now says, hey, I like what Jeremy is saying, and I can't wait for the education ministry to do something about this, and I want to do something in my own small way, what would be your advice to that person?
I would say to the, I'm assuming this teacher in the kampung is teaching a bunch of kids in sekolah rendah, kan?
Sekolah rendah,
So,
yes.
so little kids, just teaching them basic lessons that, you know, information can be right, it can be wrong. I think most people kind of fundamentally understand that, but just to explain to kids that when you want to find out a piece of information, go looking widely. Don't look at one website. Don't look at one Instagram reel. Don't look at one piece of paper that someone gave you, or don't just read one line of a story and think you understand the whole thing. Make sure you do your due diligence and consume widely and look for trusted sources that you can rely on to give you the information that you need.
And finally, after 2 decades in the chair, how do you define a news anchor? I meet a lot of people who just flat out read a news prompter and they call themselves a news anchor. What makes one be a qualified news anchor? How does one qualify to be a news anchor these days?
I never aimed to be a news anchor. That was never my job. I thought, oh, it'd be nice to be on TV one day, but I'm probably never going to make it because everyone in the media just about wants that exact job that I've got.
Right.
So I consider myself to be very lucky, but it was never the aim, because the thing I always remember as a child was that I was always very curious. When I grew up in Kota Kinabalu, it was a very small town back in the 80s, and one of the things that we used to do was to go to the airport and watch the planes. And I got a very early sense that people were coming from somewhere and they were going to somewhere. And I always used to ask my mum, where are they coming from? Where are they going? What are their lives like? What do they think? What do they think of us? What do we think of them? And that sense of curiosity, I think, is as far back as I can trace it to when I was a toddler, right the way through now. I've always been very curious about people, and the best time I have in my job, even though people know me best for being a news anchor and reading the news, the most fun I have is when I'm interviewing other people. It's very rare that I'm being interviewed. I'm normally the one asking the questions, but it's because I'm curious about people and I like to test my ideas. You know, am I wrong? How could I think about something differently? What can someone else teach me about life? You know, when I talk to elders, when I talk to people who've experienced great moments in history, what can I learn from them? I think that's what fundamentally drives my interest in being a journalist, and also helping find ways to connect all of us in society. As you said, we've got so many differences that we bring to the table to form very rich, multicultural, diverse societies. I'm interested in the things that bring us together and all the diverse ideas that bring us together in a respectful and uniting way.
Right. Jeremy, it was a pleasure and an honor having you here at the studios of Bernama. We hope to have more of you back in Malaysia. COVID's not here again.
Gerard, terima kasih. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We'll see you again. Thank you so much and enjoy your stay here in Malaysia. Come back whenever you need to.
I shall. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.